Homeland Security has indicated the number of pistol qualifying carrying DHS officer is, again, roughly 70,000, just over 70,000. If you divide out the 116 million rounds used in a year, again, you come up with a number that's in the rough range of 1,600 per person. Now, again, I'm not a mathematician, but the reason that we're here today is to help clarify this, put it in context, and get some answers. Social Security Administration, meanwhile, the Office of Inspector General, which has approximately 290 law enforcement agents, used 174,000 rounds of ammunition. In other words, the law enforcement officers at the Social Security Administration used about 600 rounds of ammunition per officer. Again, a discrepancy could be as much as 1,000 more rounds per agent at the Homeland Security compared to Social Security. And I do appreciate the clarity in which the Social Security Administration has responded to our questions and our answers. It was very impressive. I'm committed to support the work of our law enforcement officers, and I want to ensure the procurement of ammunition for training purposes and operational is be done in an effective manner. We want everybody to be properly trained. And I agree that law enforcement needs to be trained and equipped with ammunition. We just simply want to have answers, some clarification. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, Mr. Nyack, Mr. Medina, and the Inspector General O'Carroll, and on the second panel, Mr. Adler, about the solutions, procurement challenges, and things that we can do to improve the process. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Look, last year the Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Office of Inspector General issued solicitations and awarded contracts to acquire a significant amount of ammunition. So rumors and conspiracy theories began to spread almost immediately over the Internet. To the extent that we are here, Mr. Chairman, to clarify the procurement policies, to determine whether or not they are wasteful or whether or not there has been some abuse of the contracting policy, that is fine. To the extent that we are responding to conspiracy theories or whatever, I think we are really wasting everybody's time on that. It might have been predictable that Sarah Palin and like would have taken advantage of an opportunity to feed these conspiracy theories with statements that the government was preparing for civil unrest. But it was a little more disturbing that Senator Chuck Grassley would seize the opportunity to accuse the government of cornering the market on ammunition to drive up prices, as was reported in the Journal Express of Knoxville, Iowa on February 21st of this year. Unsubstantiated false conspiracy theories have no place in this committee room, hopefully. Federal ammunition purchases are a fraction of the total ammunition market, and they have been decreasing in recent years. Even the National Rifle Association distanced itself from these conspiracy theories when it issued a statement last August bluntly titled, "Federal Law Enforcement Agencies Buy Ammunition." According to the NRA, and I quote, "Much of the concern stems from a lack of understanding of the law enforcement functions," close quote, at Federal agencies. The NRA quotes from a Republican member that the Department of Homeland Security purchases, quote, "really isn't that large of an order," close quote, when you consider their large law enforcement mission. The release goes even further to state there is no need to invent additional threats to our gun owners' rights. The conspiracy theories have prompted the Department's supplier of ammunition to release a response on its website, and it reads, "The Department of Homeland Security contract makes up a very small percentage of our total ammunition output. This contract is not taking ammunition away from civilians. The current increase in demand is attributed to the civilian market. Since 2009, civilian sales of both guns and ammo have skyrocketed. In the wake of the Sandy Hook tragedy late last year, guns and ammo began flying off the shelves over concerns of new laws and restrictions. The ammunition purchasing behavior of some gun owners, motivated perhaps by a fear of ammunition shortages, has in fact caused supply of ammunition to lag behind demand. As anyone with a cursory knowledge of economics knows, the result would be an increase in price. This appears to be having a very real and negative consequence on local law enforcement. Around the country, police departments have been reporting shortages of ammunition, from a Sheriff's Department in Tennessee that reported reducing bullets it provides to deputies for training, to concerns in Oklahoma and Texas that some officers are patrolling the streets not fully equipped. I look forward to hearing from the Department of Homeland Security and the Social Security Administration Inspector General on the effects these shortages may have on law enforcement training and operations. We have seen recently in Boston the importance of highly trained, fully equipped police force. To the extent this hearing is going to concentrate on whether or not ammunition is being bought in the right amounts and distributed appropriately, then I think we're having a hearing that's worthwhile. Over the span of 10 minutes in that Boston area fight, there were 200 bullets that were shot, and in the end, as Edward DeVoe, the Watertown Police Chief, stated. And then for all of us, thank God, he, meaning Tamerlan Sanyov, ran out of ammunition. Although these events are thankfully not everyday occurrences, it's imperative that our officers be equipped to respond when they do. And according to our law enforcement officials, the ammunition purchases that are the subject of today's hearing are a necessary prerequisite for proper training and equipment. We should focus this hearing on whether or not that is the case, whether or not the purchases are excessive, whether or not the ammunition is being distributed appropriately, and stay away, hopefully, from these rather bizarre conspiracy theories. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Always good to have the gentleman from Massachusetts agreeing and quoting the NRA and justifying a billion-plus rounds of ammunition purchase.
Even a clock is right twice a day, right?
Yeah, and we will note it. Thank you. I will now recognize the Chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for an opening statement that discussed the issue we are here for today. I am sad that the ranking member wanted to make it about politics or guns or Internet statements. There is a serious question of waste and lack of accountability. The Chairman today, I am very happy and proud that he is calling in question a long-standing problem throughout government. In 1971, as a young private, I was an EOD. We disposed of and gave away regularly countless numbers of rounds not fired. It was post-Vietnam. It was a different time. Today, we deliberately do not have the Department of Defense here today, and I think that is appropriate. Their need to stockpile rounds, perhaps leading to obsolescence and disposal, is different. Their need to have a virtually infinite amount of ammunition so that when a catastrophic event happens anywhere in the world, there is sufficient ammunition to respond immediately. Back in the 1970s, there was an expression: when the Soviets come over the border, you have to come as you are and bring what you have. That is not true of Social Security. The idea that you have to have excess rounds in excess of what can be justified for training on an annual basis, year after year after year, flies in the face of common sense. Rounds are not bananas. They do not brown in a matter of days or weeks. They do have a long shelf life. They can be rotated into training so that fresh ammunition is always available for the day-to-day protection of law enforcement. Accountability for how many rounds are fired by person in support of their necessary training would lead to a number that could have been given to this committee well in advance. That is what we should have and should expect. If we discover, as I believe we will, that rounds are purchased, stockpiled, and then either disposed of or passed on to other non-Federal agencies, or shot indiscriminately and without accountability for the number of rounds, then shame on you. Now, this is a relatively small amount of dollars, but it's the kind of dollars that should be highly controlled. Bullets can kill people. They need to be safeguarded properly during their purchase, their storage, their use in training, and, of course, accountability while they are in operations. I believe this committee is long overdue to ask that basic question of, are the consumable supplies, including ammunition, by the Federal Government appropriately accounted for so as to minimize waste and minimize circumvention or misuse or simply joyful use that can happen. This morning, in the basement of the Capitol, I fired 10 rounds from a 9mm. That's not enough to qualify or to get me back to currency. I understand that. Would 20 rounds do it? Would 40 rounds do it? Would 100 rounds do it? The Department of Defense has records for that. And accountability by as much as a junior NCO or a junior officer is absolute at the Department of Defense. Today, we will begin the questioning of whether or not anything close to that level of accountability exists throughout the rest of government. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a serious hearing about potential waste and lack of accountability, and that is what we are here for today, and I commend you for this important hearing, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We will now recognize the gentleman of the subcommittee that we are doing this jointly with, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan. Chairman Jordan, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate your having this hearing today. And just let me comment first relative to the ranking member's statement. This is not about conspiracy theories. This is about good government. We just want to know. I mean, I've had, I can't count the number of times I've had constituents come up to me and ask me about this issue. They've read about it. They just want to know the truth. Sometimes you just have hearings to find out the truth. You're not trying to make political points. You're not trying to, you just want to know what's going on. That's what this is about, and that's why I appreciate the Chairman having this hearing. Multiple news reports have noted public concerns about the Federal Government's procurement of ammunition. For example, according to an article in the USA Today, on February 18th of this year, the Department of Homeland Security solicited bids for up to 1.1 billion rounds of ammunition for over the next 5 years. Based on the information provided to the committee in response to these concerns, we have learned a great deal about the procurement of ammunition by DHS and SSAIG. We hope to learn more today. As Mr. Chaffetz mentioned, I am interested to learn why Department of Homeland Security officers used almost 1,000 rounds of ammunition per officer, more than the average Army officer for small arms ammunition. And while I agree that law enforcement agents need to be trained and equipped and need all the ammunition that is required to do that, the question before us today is whether DHS and the Social Security Administration Inspector General are procuring ammunition efficiently. We have also learned that DHS consumes all purchased ammunition, but we are hearing anecdotes from law enforcement officers on the ground that suggest otherwise. Thus, I am interested in hearing from the DHS witnesses about why there is a contrast in how much ammunition the agency is procuring compared to the claims of some agents that there are ammunition shortages for their training. Today's hearing should explore potential solutions for the ways the Federal Government can improve the procurement process and make sure that we are procuring the right amount of ammunition at the most efficient cost to the taxpayer. This hearing represents an opportunity to publicly discuss the information detailing the procurement of ammunition provided by DHS and SSAIG and learn more about the Federal Government's processes, policies, and requirements for procuring ammunition. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and just getting informed and being able to answer our constituents' questions about this issue. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Members may have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record, and will now recognize our first panel. Dr. Nick Nyack is the Chief Procurement Officer for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Medina is the Assistant Director of National Firearms and Tactical Training Unit at the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He also chairs the DHS Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council. And the Honorable Patrick O'Carroll is the Inspector General at the Social Security Administration. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. If you gentlemen will please rise and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. In the order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate it if you would limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. We may have questions that will also require some follow-up. Again, we would appreciate a timely response to those, and those too will be inserted into the record. Mr. Dr. Nyack, I should say, we will now recognize you for 5 minutes. We thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to abbreviate my statement and make it much less than 5 minutes, try to answer some of your questions from your opening statement. Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Tierney, Ranking Member Cartwright, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is my honor to testify today in front of you regarding procurement of ammunition at DHS. I am DHS's Chief Procurement Officer and a career civil servant with 26 years of procurement experience in the public, academic, and private sectors. My chief responsibility is to oversee the purchase of $13 billion worth of products and services that keep our nation safe and at a reasonable cost to the American taxpayer. There is, as we have heard already, a tremendous amount of interest in the Department's purchase of ammunition. In addition to this committee, the Department has responded to over 200 inquiries from congressional offices, and GAO has notified us that they will initiate a study on weapons and ammunition purchases at the Department. We welcome that review. At this time, I would like to address several assertions that have appeared in the media and again, sort of in an abbreviated fashion, and we look forward to questions. Number one, we have not purchased 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition. I have no idea where the a billion or over ever came from in terms of us having the capability to buy that. As we know, the average is about 100 million or so rounds that we buy per year, and if you just do the math, it would take more than a decade and not shooting one bullet to get to a billion rounds on hand. You had mentioned the rounds that we have on hand, so I won't really cover that. The second assertion is that we're stockpiling ammunition. Simply not true. Look forward to questions on that. We do have 2 years' worth of usage on hand, and there are specific reasons for why we do that. You mentioned how we use ammunition. It is true in operations and training, and we can explain that further. The third assertion is DHS's recent purchases of ammunition will not create shortages and restrict the supply of ammunition available to the public. The National Shooting Sports Foundation estimates the total annual domestic production of ammunition is roughly 10 to 12 billion rounds, and DHS annual purchases equate to 1% of that production. DHS has 8 component agencies that buy and use ammunition to carry out their respective missions. Given the large number of law enforcement and security personnel the Department we established a Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council in 2003 to identify ways to achieve cost savings by leveraging the combined purchasing power of our component agencies through something called strategic sourcing. In the past 3 years alone, we've saved more than $1 billion through our strategic sourcing program. My colleague, Burt Medina, who is testifying alongside me this morning, heads the Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council. He will be able to elaborate on the significant savings and the considerable degree of standardization among ammunition requirements we have been able to achieve through strategic sourcing. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I am pleased to share that last year GAO recognized our efforts to achieve greater oversight through our strategic plan, through one of the reports that they produced where we have enhanced our oversight, our procurement oversight, and also through a study that they did on strategic sourcing where we were called out about 10 or 11 times for being a leader in that particular area, which leads to getting a good deal for the American taxpayer. I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today and look forward to answering all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We now recognize Mr. Medina for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Tierney, Ranking Member Cartwright, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is my honor to testify before you today on the procurement of ammunition by the Department of Homeland Security law enforcement agents and officers. I am currently the Chairman of the DHS Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council, or WAC for short, and I am the Assistant Director of the National Firearms and Tactical Training Unit, or NFTTU, with U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement. I am a special agent. I have been working in Federal law enforcement for over 28 years. Given the large number of law enforcement and security personnel across the Department, DHS established the Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council back in October of 2003. As the current Chair, it is my responsibility to work with all DHS components to find cost savings where possible through strategic sourcing for the acquisition of weapons, ammunition, body armor, and other law enforcement equipment. The WAC's goal is to use the collective approach for increased buying power and realize significant cost savings for these items that include weapons, ammunition, body armor, other law enforcement equipment. All these are shared needs amongst DHS components. Through the WAC, DHS components combine their expertise and resources to initiate DHS-wide contracts based on their specific mission needs. The WAC has over time had the effect of streamlining the types of equipment that the diverse components choose to use. Components have switched caliber of pistol, for example, that they use in part due to the prices they are able to secure by joining a procurement effort, which leads to the ability to further leverage buying power in future ammunition contracts. As the head of the NFTTU within ICE, I am responsible for ensuring that weapons and ammunition acquired for use by law enforcement personnel are tested, are evaluated, and distributed to our officers and agents for training and operational use. As you may know, ICE is DHS's principal investigative arm, and it is the second largest investigative agency in the Federal Government. ICE has a broad mission covering approximately 400 Federal laws regarding border security, customs, trade, and immigration. The NFTTU is the single focal point for firearms and use-of-force issues within ICE and facilitates the purchase and distribution of weapons, ammunition, as well as provides training, logistical support, and guidance to increase the safety and improve the tactical proficiency of the armed workforce within ICE. In addition, NFTTU provides armory services through shared services agreements for U.S. Customs Border Protection, Federal Protective Service, and the Federal Air Marshal Service. The NFTTU is also unique in that it has a state-of-the-art weapons and ammunition testing facility called the NFTTU Ballistics Laboratory. The BALL Lab, or for short, is staffed by experienced engineers and technicians who conduct research, testing of ammunition, firearms, and other law enforcement equipment. In addition, the BALL Lab performs examination of items returned from service to identify defects, monitor vendor quality control, and perform vendor process audits. The capabilities of the ICE BALL Lab are leveraged by other DHS components for use in strategic sourcing contracts for weapons and ammunition. Weapons and ammunition are vital and essential to ensure that our law enforcement personnel are safe and carry out their mission and to protect and defend the homeland. Although DHS spending on ammunition represents less than 1/10% of the DHS budget, it is critical for DHS components to work collectively to reduce the cost without sacrificing safety. In addition, those components within DHS that use ammunition have pursued measures to get an even better deal for the taxpayer's dollar. DHS will continue to seek ways to save taxpayers' money while maintaining a highly trained workforce that diligently protects the nation. Thank you again for this opportunity to testify before you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Mr. O'Carroll for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Tierney, and members of both subcommittees. 2 years ago, a former Social Security employee broke into the home of his ex-girlfriend, who still worked for SSA. He shot her and her new boyfriend and then fled. Our agents, working with the Kentucky State Police, tracked him into the mountains where an armed standoff ensued. It ended without shots being fired when the suspect was taken into custody. That same year, while trying to apprehend a fugitive felon, one of our agents and other members of a task force were fired at by the subject. They were forced to return fire for their own safety. In 2006, an Office of Inspector General agent from the Department of Justice was shot and killed while investigating a case involving a Bureau of Prisons guard. And last week, our agents worked hand-in-hand with their colleagues tracking the heavily armed perpetrators of the Boston Marathon bombings. The Social Security OIG conducts criminal investigations every day, and we do almost 8,000 of them every year. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the Inspector General Act, and last month marked the 18th anniversary of the Social Security Administration's OIG, established when SSA became independent from HHS in 1995. For the first 7 years of this OIG's existence, we derived our law enforcement authority from memoranda of understanding with the U.S. Marshal Service, making our agents Special Deputy U.S. Marshals. However, the Homeland Security Act of 2002 vested us with statutory law enforcement authority by amending the Inspector General Act of 1978. The new law now authorized our agents to carry a weapon, make arrests, execute search warrants, and wield the full array of Federal law enforcement powers and responsibilities. Among those responsibilities is complying with the Attorney General's guidelines for law enforcement. These guidelines mandate that each of our 294 sworn agents qualify 4 times a year with the weapon they carry on the street every day. These quarterly qualifications require between 60 and 180 bullets to be expended. That means for the most basic requirement alone, my office needs between 70,000 and 208,000 bullets every year. But there is also low-light training, a 36 to 72 round exercise that requires another 10,000 to 22,000 bullets, and other training, plus the ammunition assigned to each agent to carry in the course of their daily work. Experience tells us that each year, depending on a variety of factors, we will need at least 125,000, but fewer than 175,000 rounds of our duty-carried .357 hollow point ammunition. Over the past 8 years, since we began using .357 caliber weapons, our average annual procurement has been just over 150,000 rounds. In addition, we purchase much smaller quantities of shotgun ammunition, simunition for use in simulated training drills, and lead-free .357 ammunition for ranges that require lead-free bullets. With respect to these purchases, we estimate projected need and adjust subsequent purchases as available stock rises and falls with our usage. We procure our ammunition using SSA's Office of Acquisition and Grants to ensure compliance with all Federal contracting regulations and to prevent the unnecessary and expensive duplication of this administrative function within the OIG. Once procured, we carefully store, distribute, and track our ammunition in 66 offices across the country. Our certified firearms instructors sign ammunition in and out of secure storage facilities for training exercises and duty use, and log every round that we expend. When an Internet rumor last August cast doubt on our need for ammunition, we responded with full transparency, and I do so again today. I have provided detailed documentation on our acquisitions going back as far as we have records to reflect. Other than a false Internet rumor about civil unrest, there has been no challenge I am aware of for our need or handling of ammunition. While our response to the August rumors and our work for this hearing have left me confident in our responsible acquisition and use of ammunition, it has also shown me that there is always room for improvement. To that end, we have developed and implemented an even more stringent, centralized policy for tracking, reporting, procurement, distribution, and storage of our ammunition. We will continue to exercise prudence and diligence in our purchase and handling of ammunition with as much transparency as possible. I thank you again for the invitation to testify today, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Again, your full statements will be entered into the record. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm still not understanding the difference between operational and training. My understanding is fiscal year 2012, Homeland Security had 88 million rounds of ammunition that was used for training. 27 million rounds was for operations. Who can explain what the difference is?
I'll take the question, Mr. Chairman. Operational ammunition is ammunition that is loaded into magazines and maintained ready for duty use should an officer be called on an assignment. That would be operational, to include ammunition that is expended if a situation.
So how many times, for instance, the Homeland Security last year have to actually shoot and fire a weapon?
In terms of on actual duty?
Yeah.
I can tell you what ICE had to do. I can't tell you the.
Go ahead. ICE, how many rounds?
ICE had 15 shooting incidents last year.
Less than 100 rounds?
Less than 100 rounds, yes, sir.
So what happens to, I don't understand what happens to these rounds. Again, as we've said, it doesn't expire. There's no expiration date.
No, sir. What happens is they then use that ammunition after a period of time as training ammunition. It gets rotated back in. It gets cycled back in with their training ammunition. So in other words, they have ammunition that they use, part of it that they use for operations, and that's the complement of ammunition that they're issued. And then when they go back to the range, they periodically rotate it so that they have fresh ammunition on hand.
Again, if you do the numbers and you do the math, let's look, for instance, at Customs and Border Patrol. We've got emails and web postings and stuff from the local people on the ground saying they're getting 0 rounds, 0, for training.
Can I speak to that?
Sure.
That is, it is not accurate. What's happened is that in recent days, there's been a change in the policy. It's not essentially not really a change in the policy. The policy permits the issuance of practice rounds, not training rounds, practice rounds that an individual officer can have and take with them to practice on their own time.
Why they tell me that that's not true. Social Security is using, I mean, they're going into very dangerous operations. They arrested over 500 people in very volatile types of situations. Yet Homeland Security is using about 1,000 more rounds per person than Social Security. Why is that?
I can't speak to what Social Security does, but I can speak to that in Homeland Security, our agents and officers are exposed to a variety of situations. And it
so are they. The United States Army.
I understand, but they're exposed to a variety of situations, especially those agents that are on the border. They not only just have one weapon, they might have 3 weapons. And so for each of those weapons, they have a complement of ammunition. That they have to?
They have to qualify quarterly. What does not make sense in the information you provide is to suggest that, for instance, Customs and Border Patrol used 14,550,803 million rounds for operational purposes when they're rarely firing their gun. When they need to fire the gun, we want to make sure they're highly trained, prepared, they've got all the ammunition they need, but it seems like it's just walking out the door. There doesn't seem to be the accountability because of the exorbitant usage here. There's no accountability for where this ammunition is going.
Sir, I can assure you that the ammunition is accounted for, and they have laws.
Where? We've been asking for this for a long time. And Dr. Nyack, how can you, are you telling me that the Associated Press, the USA Today, Investors Business Daily, and the briefer who came to our offices and shared the information, that you don't have the ability and you don't have a purchase order open to be able to purchase up to $1 billion+ rounds over the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
I'm telling you, that is not what the briefer came and told us. That is not what the documents say.
Then it wasn't accurate. I believe.
So what is the right amount?
I believe.
What is the amount?
Yeah, I believe, Mr. Chairman, the contract, there are several contracts for ammunition.
There's lots of different ammunition, lots of suppliers.
Yes.
What is the grand total of ammunition that you have the ability to purchase over the next 5 years?
So I appreciate the question. When we issue contracts and the types of contracts that we issue, so I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds.
I'm just looking for a number.
The answer is a little complicated because
I know. I just want a number.
Well, I believe that what you're referring to is one contract that was awarded by Fletcher
No,
for
I'm looking at the
$70
total
million.
contract. Look, Dr. Knight, we'll come back to this. My time's expired. I'm going to ask another question. I'm sure another member is going to follow up with you. So please try to get your act together on that. When people go to FLETC and they're actually there for training, and they're not a Homeland Security personnel, do they use ammunition provided by Homeland Security, or do they bring their own ammunition?
I'll answer that question. FLETC provides the ammunition, and it's billed back to the agency.
So they're not to bring their own. What do we charge for that?
I can't answer that. I'll have to get back with you.
We would like to follow up on that because to suggest there are almost 17 million rounds used for that training, which is on addition to the other training, and we got people in the field saying, I'm not getting any rounds, it does not add up. My time has expired. Recognize the ranking member from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to reserve my time and defer to my colleague at the moment.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we know, an assortment of agencies falls under the DHS umbrella. More than 45% of all Federal officers with firearm authority are working under DHS, and the number of officers are trained and certified in the use of firearms number is growing. From 2004 through 2008, the number of full-time officers in U.S. Customs and Border Protection rose 33%. Over the same period, ICE officers rose 20%, and Secret Service rose more than 9%. Other DHS components with ammunition requirements, including the Coast Guard, Federal Air Marshal Service, and Federal Protective Service, are all growing. Border Patrol agents have more than doubled from 10,000 agents in 2004 to over 21,000 agents in 2012. It would be reasonable to assume that as the number of DHS employees using firearms are increasing, DHS would continue to procure more ammunition. But is it true? Mr. Nyack, with the surge in DHS employees with firearms authority, did DHS spend more money on ammunition or buy more rounds from 2010 to 2012?
So I'm going to start the answer, and then Mr. Medina may finish the answer. We set up contracts so that the folks, the law enforcement community within DHS has the opportunity to buy ammunition as they need it. I don't buy ammunition unless the law enforcement community requests it. And by the way, just getting back to the Chairman's question, I now do have my act together. 750 million rounds is the number that I have for everything that we have in place at this time. And again, very happy the GAO is going to be doing an audit because I know that we'll be reviewing this again with them. So,
No, I don't have anything to add to it unless you have another question.
Well, what is the answer?
Repeat the question again, ma'am.
With the surge in DHS employees with firearms authority, did DHS spend more money on ammunition or buy more rounds from 2010 to 2012?
We actually have shown, our numbers show that we're actually buying less rounds from 2010, but I can tell you what happened in 2010 where we have a spike. Back in 2009, this is specifically related to the .40 caliber. We had some issues with one of our vendors. We had multiple awards for 2 contracts, and one particular vendor had issues with their ammunition quality to the point where we could not pass some of their lots. When we could not pass some of their lots, it created a big problem for us because it takes about 6 months or so for a vendor to produce a lot to even give it to us for testing. So not only was this vendor having difficulty providing us a lot that could pass the lot acceptance testing process, the lots that had passed were then being recalled because quality issues surfaced with those lots in the field, which is detrimental to the officer's confidence in the weapons. So that was 2009. We had to shift the production to another vendor, but it took us 6 months to catch up, which means in 2009 we had some scrambling to do. We had to shift ammunition in the field to make up for the deficiency that we had with that one particular vendor, to the point where we realized we had to keep a good reserve in because we couldn't, again, take a chance on being subjected to these fluctuations with the quality of ammunition. So as you see in 2010, we ordered more than we did in other years. That was part of that. But if you look at 2011 and 2012, the numbers have come back down, and in part is our training has gone down, and the academy classes have gone down. You can see that the numbers that FLETC has are commensurate with that as well. So
despite, if I'm hearing you correctly, the consistent increase in officers, we are not really spending more money
no,
for
we're
ammunition?
not. We're not. We've been stable for the last few years.
Okay, so it's not a harbinger of government arms buildup then?
It is not.
Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. Now I recognize the chairman of the other subcommittee, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Nyack, in your I'll pick up where the chairman had left off. In your opening statement, you said you have no idea where the $1 billion, or not dollar, excuse me, 1 billion rounds number came from. You got to have some idea. I mean, because as the chairman pointed out, Investors Business Daily, USA Today, Huffington Post, Associated. But now look, I'm in politics. I know the press sometimes makes a mistake or two. But you got 4 news agencies reporting this number, and you, in your testimony here, under oath in front of the committee, say you have no clue where the number came. You got to have a clue. Tell me how they got the billion number.
I don't know how they came up with the billion number. What we come up with is 750 million rounds.
So are they just making it up?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, they could easily take some number, add some number, divide it, and do all kind of fuzzy math.
Don't you order in a 5-year kind of a ceiling contract approach? That's, I mean, that's, and I'm saying it in layman's terms. So you order in a 5-year ceiling contract, and what is that number for the 5 years? Is that the number you just gave our colleague?
So just some perspective. It's a good question. Let me answer it directly. There are, the information that I have right now, there are 34 contracts. 8 of them are strategically sourced contracts. Those are the ones that we...
What was that number you gave my colleague, though? 700, did you say 750 million?
750 million rounds.
The question rounds purchased in a 5-year ceiling contract? That's what it could purchase in a 5-year ceiling contract? Is that what you're saying?
Not a contract. In all of the contracts...
I understand. All the contracts that you have authority over.
We would have the capability over the years of collecting, of buying 750 million rounds.
So I guess I would hazard a guess saying maybe the news organization said in a 10-year time frame, using 2 5-year ceiling contracts, 750 million, 750 million, 1.5 billion. Is that, you think they did it that way?
Maybe.
Maybe?
Maybe.
Seems to make sense to me. Mr. Medina, you want to offer something on that?
We noticed during some of our work that we did, looking at what was purported to have been what we were buying, that in one instance there was a 70 million round contract that was misstated as 750 million. in one of the blogs. So that could be where it's coming from. But other than that, we really have no way of telling how they came to that conclusion.
Mr. Nayak, in your testimony, you said 200 congressional offices have contacted you regarding this issue. That must be a big number. You wouldn't have cited it in your statement. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think so many folks are calling you? Why do you think so many members of Congress are interested? Is it because of what I said? We're getting a lot of questions from constituents back home. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I appreciate the question. I don't want to speculate on why that's the case. I know that this has been
Did you guys ever publicly issue a clarification saying, look, it ain't 1.5, folks, it's 750 million? Did you ever do that?
I do know that the Secretary has mentioned it, the Undersecretary for
Management. No, did you do like a, we do press statements. We're in politics. We do that stuff. Did you do a press statement?
Not to my knowledge.
Here's what I think. I think the reason we got so much concern out there is I think frankly the Department of Homeland Security's got a credibility problem. And I'll tell you what, and this is an unrelated issue, but I think this goes to why the Chairman called the hearing, why constituents are nervous about this. This is the same agency. I mean, you guys are obviously familiar with what took place at ICE, where 6 weeks ago, 2,228 illegal detainees were released. 647 of them were criminals. 8 of them were level 1 felons. And now the American public sees that. Mr. Morton tells the world, told the Judiciary Committee, which I'm a member of, told the committee we had to do that because of sequester, even though we had 20 months to get ready for sequester and plan for it. If you've done a little planning, it seems to me you could have been ready for that. And now the American people hear about reports from 4 credible news organizations that the same organization is buying 1.5 billion rounds of ammunition. You got a credibility problem. I mean, plain and simple. And then when you do the numbers, 1,300 rounds per DHS employee per year, and you compare it to our soldiers in uniform in the United States Army, 347 rounds per soldier per year, you got a credibility problem. And you don't even issue a press release to clarify it. That's why you're here. That's why the Chairman called the committee, and that's what our constituents want to know. So, and I apologize, I got 15 seconds or 17 seconds left for you guys to respond, but Mr. Nayak or Mr. Medina, I think you need to respond, let the American people know what's going on to improve the credibility of the Department of Homeland Security.
I appreciate your point. I agree that we need to get the information out. I look forward to the GAO report and getting the information out.
Chairman, I get back.
And that's one of the frustrations. We can't always wait for an audit. When the Secretary of Homeland Security says, well, it's 150 million rounds, and she's off by tens of millions of rounds, who's minding the store? You have more than 260 million rounds on hand, and you got Border Patrol agents complaining that they get 0 for training, 0. Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes. The ranking member, just as a point of clarification, has deferred. He's holding his time, and we'll come back to him. But we'll now recognize Mr. Gowdy for 5 minutes.
I thank Mr. Chairman, the gentleman from Utah. And Mr. Chairman, I also thank you for your leadership on this issue. And Chairman Jordan used his opening statement, and then he also used his questioning, Dr. Nayak, to talk about this global pursuit of the truth and how credibility can be impeached or impacted by false statements in the past. And I guess his line of questioning is buttressed by the fact that at least all of us on this side have received countless inquiries from our constituents, and you yourself have received countless inquiries from Congress. So I guess fundamentally I would ask you, do you understand why we're having this hearing? Do you understand why the hearing was and is warranted?
Absolutely, yes.
Why?
To get answers to the purchases of ammunition across, obviously across a couple of agencies here, get a better understanding of it, and are we getting a good deal for what we're buying, and all of the other good questions that you guys are asking.
Well, I think that is part of it. I think you're right, that's part of it. Do you think it's important for people in positions of leadership to be credible with the assertions that they make?
Certainly, and in a large enterprise, we do the best we can at particular moments in time, but certainly.
When someone is not credible, what impact does that have?
It obviously hurts until you can regain credibility.
And it doesn't just hurt in that area. It begins to slowly impact your credibility across a wide range of areas. And I'm actually, Doctor, not talking about you. This is the first time I've ever laid eyes on you, and I assume vice versa. It's certainly the first time I've ever had the privilege of asking you questions, but it's not the first time I've had the privilege of asking questions of folks from your agency. So it just strikes me that just kind of globally, back to Chairman Jordan's point about this pursuit of the truth and credibility and what erodes public trust, just kind of fundamentally when a witness, I mean, you made reference to the Secretary herself and perhaps her efforts to kind of explain this issue previously, but when that's the same person who is the only person in the Western Hemisphere who thinks the border is secure, that impacts credibility, correct? Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd rather not answer that question for the Secretary.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. When Madam Secretary says that TSA agents will be furloughed today, and they're never furloughed, do you think that impacts credibility?
I really can't answer something that I don't have that much knowledge about.
When a law enforcement agent is sued or official is sued by the agents and officers who work under her for a failure to enforce the current law, do you think that impacts credibility?
Yeah, I'd really rather allow someone else to answer that question. And incidentally, I have seen you before.
You testified before?
No, I see you on TV.
Oh. Don't believe everything you see on television. All right, well, let me try that one, because these are obviously, you're not the primary person I'd like to be asking, but you do concede that the answers we give to questions impacts our credibility, and then that credibility or believability impacts whether or not the general public believes our explanations. I mean, you see the connection, right? If you have or if someone hypothetically has a history of making comments that are demonstrably false, then even if you do explain a phenomenon, the answer may not be believed. So airport lines, if someone were to hypothetically say that we're going to see airport lines 150 to 200% longer, and that never materializes, do you think that would impact the credibility of the speaker?
It's just a little bit, all of this is a little bit out of my swim lane.
All right. The specific instances would be outside of your area of expertise, but you do agree that if there are comments made that are incredible in the truest sense of the word, and I don't mean incredible as in good, I mean a lack of credibility, then that is necessarily going to impact whether or not the public believes other explanations. You do agree with me on that, right?
I just think in the context of this hearing, you will find that in the end that we are credible in the information that we're sharing, and that we take it extremely seriously in terms of, in my case, in the world of procurement, setting up contracts to get a good deal for the taxpayer while allowing the users to buy things to protect the country.
And actually, Doctor, I believe you. I have no reason at all, none, to question your credibility. So it might be wise if the author of some of these other comments would inform herself or himself, as the case may be, as much as you have on issues before he or she makes public pronouncements. And with that, I would yield back to the Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Massachusetts continues to defer, so we'll recognize the gentleman from Michigan, somebody I traveled with to the southwest border. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bentivolio, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and panelists, for appearing before us today. I'm sure I'm not the only member of Congress, as we've seen, to receive a considerable volume of constituent mail concerning the topic of discussion today. And I assure you, the American people are very interested to hear what you have to say today. But let me start with this point. Regardless of whether or not these ammunition purchases are justified, it comforts me to see the American people's vigilance. If their concerns are overdrawn, I am grateful they err on the side of caution. The American people have a right to be watchful and a right to sound the alarm at the first sign of trouble. In my own experience, I led training for SWAT, from basic firearm qualification all the way to complex SWAT operations as an instructor and manager of that training. I have a few questions. I was going through this purchase, Mr. O'Carroll, of hollow point and full metal jacket. And if you will, just bear with me for a second. You claim to have researched the open market to compare the cost of hollow point to that of full metal jacket. You then said, for example, in your testimony, Pro Bass Shops advertises a box of 50 hollow points for $33.49 and one 20-box of a full metal jacket for the same company, from the same company retails for approximately $24. Then you said, based on these numbers, one round of hollow point sells for approximately 67 cents, while one round of full metal jacket approximately $1.20. Surely you understand that advertised prices and retail prices can't be compared? And advertised price is almost by definition much lower than a retail price, not to mention the volume, or 20 rounds versus 50 affects the unit price in obvious ways. And it was in my own research, well, let me cut this short and just ask you a question. Do you find that hollow point is more expensive than full metal jacket? And what were your reasons for full metal jacket? Why do you need that in any type of operation?
Congressman, I'm glad you asked that. The reason, what we use for our training is the same ammunition that we carry on duty. And what we find is that what you carry, what you train with, and then what you carry is going to be much more effective. So one, that's why we don't break down and use, let's say, for example, full or leaded bullets at the range and then hollow points in the carry. We use the metal jacketed pointed ones all the time. And the reason we do it, and that's probably to get to the crux of your question, is that what we find is that when used, a hollow point bullet is going to flatten out and it's not going to travel as far. So it's a much safer type of bullet to use in law enforcement than a regular leaded bullet would, which would sometimes goes much further and can hit other people. So that's the main reason why we do the hollow point, and that's why we carry that in our weapons.
And the target shooters, they say it makes a better hole in the paper of the target, I understand. Is that correct? Yeah.
I'll tell you from experience, the holes in paper are different between the two rounds, correct.
And I understand. Now, can you tell me what the basic load is for an officer on the job?
In terms of what
regular officer, not SWAT type work.
Right, they're going to have in our case, we're carrying a .357 SIG, 13 rounds, and usually 2 magazines besides it.
So that's 39 rounds.
Correct.
And how many to qualify? What, quarterly or yearly?
What we're doing is according to the Attorney General guidelines, we have to qualify quarterly. And then what we shoot in a round of range, and as you're familiar with, is a round is usually about 60 rounds is a round of qualification. And what we're finding with that is, and that's why when I gave my numbers for the committee on this thing, is that we use a range. Because as an example, if when our agents go to the range, if somebody's very qualified, they might shoot 1 round. A new agent might need to shoot the 3 rounds or 180 rounds at the range. So usually what we're doing is we're doing about 60 rounds per agent 3 times or 180 4 times a year.
Okay, so he's using 21 more rounds from ammunition that he's actually carrying. So he takes his personal ammunition, he goes to the range, uses another 21 rounds if he fires 60 rounds, correct?
Correct.
4 times a year.
FIFO is what we call first in, first out. We're doing that with their ammunition supply as well as the carry rounds that they're doing. They expend the rounds that are in their possession, and then when they leave, they pick up new rounds to have in their possession.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. Mr. Chairman, yield back to you.
Thank you. We'll now recognize, again, deferring, we're going to go ahead and recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for coming here. I guess this is probably for Dr. Nyack. How does DHS determine the ceiling number for these indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts?
Yeah. The ceiling is actually decided between my office and the requiring activity or the law enforcement community. So I'm just going to ask Bert to sort of talk about how do we determine the ceilings.
Yes, sir. Ceilings are based on our past history with respect to consumption by the components. That's how we determine the ceiling, and we generally are pretty close to that number every time we go through the entire period of performance with our contracts.
And I guess with the news reports and how folks were reacting to it, I guess there was the insinuation that DHS was stockpiling ammunition to kind of affect the availability of ammunition for private citizens on the private market. Can you say categorically that that was never a factor in any ammunition contracts that were discussed?
I can say categorically that that's not a factor at all.
How many individuals under the DHS umbrella are required to do periodic firearms training? Do we know? I mean, I know like TSA agents are not necessarily armed. Do you have a number on that?
Our number for those that are armed and are required to qualify is around 70,000 or so.
Okay. And for FLETC, so FLETC, that's pretty much all law enforcement, federal law enforcement agencies except the FBI. Is that what it is now?
FLETC has a large multitude of agencies that train at FLETC. In addition, they do training for state and local agencies, and FLETC consumes quite a bit of ammunition in the context of the training that they do at the various facilities that they have.
So state and local folks who get trained at FLETC, they use some of this ammunition too. About how many rounds a year does FLETC use? Do you have a ballpark on that?
Yeah, I have it right here.
How much? 17 million?
15 million?
Does 17 million, does that sound about right? Okay. Because we were looking, and if you look at the number of rounds per DHS employee, I guess we calculated about 1,290 rounds per DHS employee. But when we looked at the Army for fiscal year 2012, if you looked at the amount of rounds per U.S. soldier, it was about 347 rounds. Now, we did look at what was actually expended, and there were 270 rounds used by DHS in the line of duty in FY 2012. But I mean, and I don't have the number for the Army, but obviously I think we'd all admit that they probably expended more than 271 rounds in the line of duty. So, I guess like a citizen would look at this and say, well, why do you guys need to have 3 times, more rounds per employee than the U.S. Army? So what would you say?
Well, I can't speak to what the U.S. Army does. But I can tell you that with respect to our law enforcement officers, they only have that weapon to protect their lives when they're out there working the front lines. They can't call in air support. They can't contact a squad to come help them. All they have is that weapon, that one weapon that provides them with the security to maintain the safety of themselves and the folks that they're entrusted to protect. And so they have to be proficient in the use of that weapon at a very high level, because they're operating in the United States in a civilian law enforcement capacity, which is different from a military capacity. But again, I can't speak to how the Army trains their folks and why they justify the number of rounds that they actually consume.
Okay. And just for the rounds I was talking about for the Army was just small arm rounds, but I understand what you're saying. There were also news reports about, and this was something that I got asked by constituents about, whether the DHS was starting to procure armored vehicles. This was on websites and put out. Is there any truth to that? Does DHS have armored vehicles? Is there a need for it? Has there been anything from the agency that would substantiate those reports?
We have some MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush vehicles. Not very many. They weren't procured. They were provided to us by the Department of Defense, and we use them for special operations for officer rescue. In fact, One, last year was extremely beneficial for us in a situation where it protected our officers from gunfire while we were involved in an operation. So, yes, we do have some, but it's not very many. It's less than 30, I believe.
Okay. All right. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Horsford, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to focus for a moment about strategic sourcing under the Department. And as we know, an assortment of agencies falls under the Department's umbrella. More than 45% of all Federal officers with firearm authority are working under DHS. And the number of officers who are trained and certified in the use of firearms number is growing. From 2004 to 2008, the number of full-time officers in the U.S. Customs and Border Protection rose 33%. Over the same period, ICE officers rose 20%, and Secret Service rose more than 9%. Other DHS components with ammunition requirements, including the Coast Guard, Federal Air Marshal Service, and Federal Protective Service, are also growing. Border Patrol agents have more than doubled from 10,000 agents in 2004 to over 21,000 agents in 2012. It would be reasonable to assume that as the number of DHS employees using firearms increases, that the DHS would continue to procure more ammunition. But is it true? Mr. Nayak, is that Dr. Nayak, excuse me, with the surge in DHS employees with firearms authority, did DHS spend more money on ammunition or buy more rounds from 2010 to 2012?
I would say under normal circumstances that's generally the case. What the determining factors are on the amount of ammunition we buy are two things. One, it's the level of staffing that we have, our footprint of those that are authorized to carry guns. So commensurately with that, as the footprint goes up, we're going to buy more rounds because we're going to consume more rounds. But also, the other factor is how much training we're doing, how much basic training classes are going on. So to the extent that there's a lot of that going on, more rounds will be consumed. To the extent that that drops, less rounds are going to be consumed. There was a spike in 2010. That was our high year, and that might explain some of the Secretary's comments about $150 million, where we bought $148 and some change. That was the high year. And that was as a result of some issues that we had in 2009 where we couldn't get ammo, so we had to make up for it in that year. But if you look at 11 and 12, they're relatively consistent. And we do have a reserve that we try to maintain to avoid fluctuations that the marketplace sometimes presents. And so it's been pretty steady now. We're pretty steady for our number of officers that we have.
So despite the increase of DHS officers and agents, the budget for ammunition procurement declined from 2010 to 2012. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's actually gone down somewhat.
And rounds purchased by the DHS declined in the same period?
That's correct.
So the DHS's trend of purchasing less ammunition for more employees and more firearms training is far from a harbinger of government arms buildup.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I had to be at another hearing, and I just wonder, you probably have already covered this, but some people feel that because of an excessive amount of purchases by Federal agencies that it's led to shortages and greatly increased prices. And I would be interested to know what you said about that before I got here. I'm sure you covered that. Did somebody want to explain that to me?
Sir, I can comment on that. We represent, DHS acquisition represents a very small percentage of the commercial market. In fact, one of our ammunition suppliers has put on their website that DHS does not impact what their current production for the commercial market is, and that in fact the greatest issue that's concerning the commercial market is the fact that there's a tremendous demand on the commercial market. In fact, you can't even get rimfire ammunition. It's very hard to get, and we don't use any of that. So it's a tremendous demand by the commercial market, and the DHS requirements for ammunition are of very little impact to those suppliers.
Well, it seems to me that you have purchased a very excessive amount, or the Federal Government as a whole has purchased a very excessive amount that's not really needed. I remember reading a few years ago that the average FBI agent, not counting practice, actually fired a bullet 1.1 times 1.1 bullets in their entire career. And I mean, most of these Federal agencies almost never fire a bullet in an actual gunfight. And so it seems to me that especially in times of tight budgets, that this is one area that we should be greatly reducing the amount of money that's being spent, instead of just letting all these officers fire basically for the fun of it. So thank you very much.
Well, will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Adding on to what he's saying, if you have, my understanding is, on hand, in storage, we have more than 3,400 rounds per person in storage. Doesn't that strike you, does that strike you as excessive? Does that strike you as, well, we need that many per person? Every single person that carries a gun in Homeland Security has more than 3,400 rounds sitting in storage?
What we do is ammunition's ordered months ahead of time. And so certain things happen when the ammunition comes in. And we, in terms of the ordering process, I
know. I'm asking you, what's a reasonable amount to have in storage?
Well, we believe that what we have in storage, which is anywhere from 18 months to a 2-year supply, is reasonable because of market fluctuations we've experienced in the past with particular.
So you're telling me you got to have 3,400 rounds because it saves money?
Well, it's not so much about saving money, is that we've had issues with getting ammunition from the vendors in the past because they could not pass our lot acceptance test. And the other thing that happens is when a contract expires, it takes us about a year to get another contract. Matter of fact, right now we have one that we have to move quickly on because it takes, and just the contracting process in and of itself, going through it doesn't guarantee you that you'll have a successful offer. We've had to go back to the drawing boards on .40 calibers more than once because none of the ammunition that was submitted for the test in the solicitation would even function in our weapons. So you end up in a situation where you've got no supplier. You've got to rely on what you have in your stores to run you through that period of time. So that's why we believe we need a 2-year supply, 18-month to 2-year supply.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to go back and look at. We certainly want them to have the training that they need, but it does sound excessive to me to have, hundreds of millions of rounds sitting in storage. It does seem a bit excessive. My time is about to expire, so we'll now recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and first, and thank all the witnesses. Is this ammunition American-made?
Yes, it is, Madam.
It is American-made. And how many companies make it?
There are generally 3 manufacturers that are capable of supplying us in terms of volume, but right now we have contracts, I believe, with, how many? Is it 2? Two big suppliers?
Yeah, I don't want to say the number of contractors, but we have about 17 that we've identified, yes, U.S. companies.
You have 17 U.S. companies, and you have contracts with 2 of them. Could you submit to the record, to the Chairman and Ranking Member, a list of who these companies are and what their contracts are for?
Absolutely.
Okay, and it's been widely reported, and I'd like unanimous consent to put 3 newspaper articles in on this in the Democratic memo for today, if I could, in the record.
Sorry. Without so ordered.
Thank you, thank you. But it's been reported around that that the Department has accumulated 1.6 billion rounds of ammunition. And I'd like to ask Mr. Nyack, is that true or not true?
Okay, so we had answered that, and it's not true.
It's not true. Okay. So it's decreased to what? So it was it's reported in the paper that I'm putting in here 1.9 billion. It's decreased to what? How much do you have in storage now? Like about 5 months rounds, 200 million? How much is?
So in storage is two years worth of ammunition.
Which is?
Bert, what was the number?
It's around 220 million.
220 million?
Yeah.
Well, why does the Department have any inventory at all? Can't they just order the ammunition as you need it? Why can't you just order it instead of having hundreds of millions of ammo sitting around?
I'll answer that, Madam. It's because the ammunition that we buy even though it's sort of COTS, commercial off the shelf, it's made specifically to our contract specifications. And so ammunition has to go through, the duty ammunition, not training, but the duty ammunition has to go through an arduous process that ensures that that ammunition is going to be of the highest quality for our folks. And so they can only ship ammo to us from DHS-approved lots. That's why.
Well, the ammunition off the shelf, doesn't that come from the 17 manufacturers in America?
It does, but they're generally made on different production lines. For example, our .40 caliber ammunition, which is the big one that I guess most people have commented about, it's the $450 million ceiling contract for 5 years. When we place an order against that contract, a delivery order, they will make a lot, and it takes them several months to make a lot because they have to buy the components separately, propellant. And
well, could we do a contract that said, hey, we're going to order this once we use up the ammunition that we have in inventory sitting around? I guess my question is, what would happen if the Department simply stopped acquiring ammunition and just used up what you've got on hand?
we would run out of ammunition because the
246 million rounds, you'd run out of ammunition?
What would happen, Madam, is that if we used up what we had in our reserves and we placed an order at the point where we used up what we had in our reserves, it would take another 6 months, at least 6 months, for the manufacturers to deliver ammo to us. So we'd have a period of time there where we wouldn't have ammo. We've got to keep the pipeline of ammunition flowing so that our folks don't run out of ammo. That's why we have to have it's a constant turnover of ammo. And yes, we do have a reserve to make up for any unforeseen circumstances that might happen in the marketplace or quality issues that might come up with a vendor or a contract that might expire, and we would have to have ammo to ensure that it could get us to the next contract.
Okay. And according to the Congressional Research Service, which reviewed the Department's awards and solicitations and information provided to the subcommittee, the largest award made last year was for up to 450 million rounds of .40 caliber rounds for ICE. And does that mean the Department will take immediate delivery of 450 million rounds?
No, Madam. That's just a ceiling. It's for 5 years, and it's up to 450. It is not that we're going to take delivery of 450 million rounds.
And what's the minimum amount the Department must purchase each year under the contract?
Yeah, we can get that information to you. I don't have the exact minimum. Usually, it's not it's not very high, but we can get that information.
It's in the neighborhood of 10,000. Okay. It's not much.
Thank you. And it appears that the Department actually used slightly more ammunition than it purchased in both fiscal years 2011 and 2012. Is that true? This is from the CRS report.
I'll have to get that data for you.
We thank the gentlewoman, and we will certainly work to get that. It's also a number that I'd like to see what the minimums are as well. We now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this hearing that obviously is addressing some of the questions that we have from back home. I don't know of any other issue that I've been called personally on, sent more personal emails on than this particular issue. And my esteemed colleague, the gentleman from South Carolina, brought up a very valid point. It is a point of credibility, gentlemen. And when you have people within your organization saying one thing, and the truth of the matter is that's not borne out, it provides a real lack of credibility in terms of some of the things that you've disseminated. And we need to rectify that and get to the truth here today. And thank you for coming to help us with that. Also, I want to bring out, from a law enforcement standpoint, I enjoy the support and the counsel of my law enforcement groups back home. Regardless of party, they have typically done the right thing for the right reason consistently. And so I look to you, gentlemen, to do the right thing for the right reason. And with that, I want to go on a little bit further. And Mr. Medina, Mr. O'Carroll, I'd ask you to hopefully illuminate us. Why is there such a difference in terms of the amount of rounds operationally that we need between your two agencies in terms of efficiency? Some 1,000 round per individual difference. Is one of you being more efficient or one being more accurate?
I can't speak to what Social Security has, but that's—
Well, they use a lot less. Is that correct, Mr. O'Carroll?
That's correct, sir.
Right. But I can tell you that the determinant factor on number of rounds that are used for operations is going to be the number of weapons that each officer is authorized to carry, and the number of times that they're going to qualify during the course of the year.
So let's take aside, why are we storing so much that would be non-training ammo? We're looking at. Aren't those in two different classifications from a procurement standpoint?
Well, it comes from the same batch. I mean, it's all operational ammo. It's all duty ammo that we use for training and operations.
So there's no difference.
They're not distinguishable. We use the same contract for both.
All right, same contract. But in terms of allocating and the number of resources that you have, obviously you go through training ammo at a much faster rate than you would operational ammo, I would hope.
It's true, and operational ammo gets cycled back into training after a period of time as well.
All right, so why are your standards different from Mr. O'Carroll's?
The only thing I can say is I'm not sure what they authorize for weapons with their officers, if it's different from ours.
So you use a SIG Sauer, is that correct? Is that what I heard earlier?
We use a SIG Sauer, but we also have other weapons that they're authorized to have in addition to their SIG Sauer, like a secondary, a backup small type weapon that they're authorized. They're also authorized to have a rifle, depending on their duty assignment.
But this is not rifle ammo that we're talking about.
All of it includes rifle.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. O'Carroll.
Well, Mr. Meadows, in our case, in fact, we have one issue weapon that we have. We use the same weapon for our training. That's our one duty weapon on it. And quite frankly, as I explained before, with our amount of qualifications that we have, with the duty that or the weapon or the ammunition that they carry, I guess we're about 600 rounds per agent a year.
All right, which is 1,000 less than what you do, Mr. Medina?
It isn't necessarily that way. It's just an average that you take if you do the math, but it doesn't work out that way because we have folks that are assigned to special operations.
So we have to have a special kind of math to figure this out.
Well, it is, because there are folks that consume quite a bit less than that, and there are folks that consume quite a bit more than that. It just depends on the specific job assignment you're talking about. For example, you got special response teams that use quite a bit more ammo than, say, an agent who works in an office.
All right.
So they have a different complement of ammunition issued to them.
All right. I see my time's expiring, but let me, if you're going to restore credibility, what would you do at this point, Dr. Nyack, Mr. Medina? What do you think you need to do to restore credibility where my people back home can start saying that they can rely on you to do the right thing for the right reason and not give all kinds of rhetoric?
I think one thing I would say is our organization is an open window. I mean, we have absolutely nothing here. We're very proud of what we've done. We think we've done a great job, and I welcome the folks to come see our facility.
But they can't come. Well, I mean, I'm talking about my people back in North Carolina. How do we tell them that you're doing the right thing for the right reason?
I think it's just a matter of explaining it and putting out the information. So.
I see my time's expired. I appreciate the Chair's indulgence. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been fascinating, and I apologize for coming in late. I had business on the floor, but we were dealing with the issue, though, and comes up, and it may have been stated a different way earlier, but I want to get back to this because for my people, Mr. Meadows and I, we actually border districts. I'm Northeast Georgia. He's the North Carolina side, so we share a lot of the same folks that are family, and we come in, we get a lot of questions. In fact, I even have with me today, because this has become such a hot topic, I have my legislative correspondent, one who deals with all the questions and deals with all the correspondence, who gets this question every day. And that question basically will run many different ways, but they're having a hard time buying ammo. They're going to stores and they can't get it. And then they read through reports, has been talked about here before, that you're buying up all this ammo. I'm just going to ask it point blank for my folks back home as they ask me. I'll let you answer it. Is the issue with them buying ammo, would you say it's because of the contracts that you have out there right now, that you're intentionally buying up all this ammo to keep it out of the shelves?
Sir, it is not. We're not even affecting it anywhere near to what the market forces are.
And to go along with that, I have talked to ammo manufacturers, and they confirm that. I think that then that gets me past these questions and gets to really the next question. It's been sort of asked here, in light of all of the questions that you've heard today, and a lot of the comparison, especially military, which there's been some comparison here to why you fire significantly more than active duty, and I'm a member of the Air Force Reserve still. And there's such a constant hold, if you would, and close check on the amount of rounds fired from our military perspective, even when they have to qualify and even when they have training. Can you explain to me both, or anyone like to me, why does there seem to be much more need here in these agencies as compared to our military?
I can't explain what the military fires. All I know is I have a facility in Fort Benning, Georgia, and I actually live in Georgia. And
Georgia person.
We train with the Rangers all the time down there in our facility, and they shoot quite a bit more rounds than what was mentioned here is what the Army shoots. So, as far as that's concerned, but I can tell you that from a Federal law enforcement standpoint, it's important for our officers to be trained and have confidence in their weapons, all the weapons that they're issued, and especially those folks that are in the special response teams that have to engage themselves in high-risk operations, which we have in ICE, and CBP has them as well. So it just goes to the level of proficiency and confidence that we want our officers to have with their sidearm, which is all they have. They don't have everything else and all the resources that the military has when they go into a hostile environment.
Well, I think one of the things that we're dealing with here, and I think it's been the questions have been asked, and the questions I'm coming on here, is the simple issue of are we being good stewards of American money. One of the problems that I have right now, and this is going to probably get me calls, but that's fine. They'll know where my office is. I'm tired of coming in the Rayburn office building and seeing SUVs sitting out front with their engines running and waiting on somebody to testify to come back out. That's a waste of money. When you look at it here, it's the same kind of thing. Do we need the 2-year supply? Do we need a 2-year backup? Is there such a problem coming from the manufacturers? And I noticed a little bit of what you said about quality. If there's that kind of a quality problem here, then shouldn't we be looking at something else and say, why are we having a quality issue that you need 2 years' worth of backup here? I think that's the problem that most don't understand. They don't understand why we need this 2 years. And I know you've explained lag times and procurement times, but this is the issue, I think, from a stewardship standpoint. Do you understand the questions and what we're dealing with here today? Sir,
I do. And we have no hard and fast rule on a 2-year. It's an 18-month to 2-year supply, and we've built up a reserve because of the issues that we've had with deliveries and quality in the past. Now, that's not to me. It's not to say that it might not change in the future, depending on what we can establish as a track record of reliability from our suppliers. But you got to remember, it's just as recent as 2009 we had issues. And so we've had to make adjustments to what we store in our reserves because of the issues that we had in 2009. Now, again, when you see a reserve, that's not wasted. That's going to be consumed. So it's not like ammunition that's going to be thrown away. It's going to be consumed through training and operations.
And that's never been denied. I think the issue here is what we're looking at, and what people is the question I asked earlier. You have a perception issue. And we deal in perception. And as I've said many times before, perception is reality to people. And that's what we've got to deal with here. There's a reality that you see these, we're buying these large contracts. I can't get my ammo at my local gun store or Walmart. It's got to be the government taking my ammo. Then we look at it and say, got a 2-year supply. Well, why do we need that much? It goes back to stewardship. I appreciate the answers that you're giving. I think the understanding is from our perspective, it's just a stewardship issue, a bottom-line stewardship issue. Mr. Chairman, I see my time is gone. I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm grateful for this hearing. And I've heard my colleagues ask some very important questions about why the Department of Homeland Security needs so much ammunition compared to other Federal law enforcement entities, compared to the Department of Defense. Further, I am troubled by DHS's lack of accountability and, at sometimes, transparency when it comes to answering direct questions about their ammunition procurement. But being that so, many people are more concerned with what they believe to be billions of rounds of ammunition, and because some websites and blogs have asserted the ammunition may be used to suppress civil unrest, I will take my questions in a slightly different question. So, Dr. Nayak, I've got quite a few questions here, so taking us from point A to point B. So if we could be, rather quick in our answers, I got a long way to go. I've heard references to DHS hoarding billions of rounds of ammunition. True or false?
False. I think Bert and I will probably take some of these questions.
Okay, either one will be fine. I know you explained in your testimony why certain people may have misunderstood the documents they based on these claims. Would you very briefly again explain what an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity IDIQ contract is?
Yeah, so I'll take that. Thank you. Very briefly, it is a type of contract where you're buying something. There's a minimum order. There's a maximum ceiling. Usually there's a number of years. Those years can anywhere from 1 to 5, even 10 years of supply. And you use those when you're not exactly sure how much you'll need, when you'll need over that period of time. So that's why you have a minimum and a maximum. And why even a maximum? A maximum so that we can leverage the possibility to get a good deal for the taxpayer. That's kind of where my world comes into play. That's where this term strategic sourcing comes in. And we've been able to, through our strategic sourcing program and by leveraging volume, get very good deals for the taxpayer when we buy ammo.
Would you concur, Mr. Medina, Dr. Medina?
Yes, I would concur.
Let me ask you, and I heard my gentleman friend before, is that when we're procuring these large inventories, are we also looking at the procurement of the necessary backgrounds like casings and gunpowder to make sure there's ample supplies? We got problems here, and I've got an ammo builder in Payson, Arizona, and one of the problems that they say is they can't. It's increasingly harder to get brass, gunpowder, all the way along the line. It seems like, if I'm reading this right, that you as an end source, okay, and looking at this from that standpoint, would want to make sure that there's ample supply of quality brass, quality parts. Can you tell me what you look at and how you can make sure that there's more readily supplies along those lines?
I can tell you that we don't get into the components because that's really the responsibility of the manufacturer.
Do you restrict any of those, or do you know any agencies that are restricting those access?
No, I do not. Matter of fact, we actually recycle our brass. We do GSA auctions for our brass to try to save taxpayer money, and actually we're bringing money back in through that process.
Well, I think it's very obvious from other agencies that we have really put a restriction in regards to ammo production.
Yeah, we have not. We work really, really well with vendors. As I mentioned in my original testimony, with our ISO 2000 certified lab, we work real close with the vendors, and we share a lot of the technology aspects. And so, but with respect to the components, we don't. And the big vendors that we normally deal with generally make their own components. That's usually what happens. Other than propellant, they actually generally buy propellant, but the projectiles and the cartridge casings, they generally make them themselves.
It seems to me, as an end user, you'd be very familiar, that there's ample supplies of those. And have you addressed any of the aspects behind the scenes of the limits or supply negatives that we've seen in the marketplace? Because it makes a lot of difference to people in that business.
Well, I mean, there's really not a lot we can do since we're essentially a consumer. We do, we're subject to the same market fluctuations that some of your.
No, but I understand where you're going with this, but you're not reading what I'm asking you. In order to be an end product user, you got to make sure that there's ample supplies of the supplies to build your end product. And so you might want to make sure that the policies are in place not to restrict brass and not to restrict gunpowder. How are we looking at that in that aspect to make sure there's ample supplies so that you get your product?
Yeah, those kinds of policy decisions are sort of outside my lane. We really don't have.
I would suspect that we would start looking at that. That's part of our line of inquiry, because there is a restriction in those aspects, and it definitely affects you as the end user and does the economics of producing ammo all the way across the board for everybody. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing on a very important issue. I think this gets to the heart of the purpose and the mission of the Oversight Committee. That is, when a department or an agency can't or doesn't give a straight answer to the press or the American public, and the American public becomes frustrated, it's the mission of this committee to get the answers in unambiguous terms. And they deserve to know specifically how this ammo is being procured and in what quantities. Now, I've been here for an hour and 40 minutes and listened to a lot of testimony, but I still can't get my head around the numbers. Walk me through this. If we need 60 rounds per agent per quarter to qualify, that's 240 rounds per agent per year to qualify on their firearms. Why do they need over 1,000 rounds, knowing that they rarely discharge their weapon in the line of duty?
I'll speak from the standpoint of DHS, and I won't say all of DHS because there's different aspects of DHS. But
if it's brief, that'd be good.
Yeah, it will be brief. It's a function of the weapons that they have. In our agencies, we have not just the qualification with multiple weapons. We have, and it's 2 attempts to qualify plus practice. So for example, in ICE, it's 50 rounds, not 60. But they get 2 attempts to qualify with each weapon, and they might have as many as 3. And if you're in special operations, you might have more weapons. And they also get they have to do what we call advanced firearms training exercises quarterly that expends ammunition. So it's much more than just 50 rounds, 60 rounds. It's quite a big number of rounds of training.
Thank you very much. Now, it was stated before that hollow points are generally used for practice. And it was stated that they are safer because they don't over-penetrate. And while that is true, the real reason to use hollow points is they are more lethal than the other rounds. And I would want law officers in the line of duty to have the most lethal round they can have. Hollow points are designed to expand as they enter the body, causing maximum damage by tearing apart tissue and organs and transferring all of the energy of the bullet to the target. Can you tell me in very certain terms that hollow points are actually cheaper than full metal jacket or just lead bullets to use for practice?
I can tell you from our standpoint, and we are always looking for a better price on everything. At the rate that we buy hollow points, we're buying them very cheap, and it is essentially the duty ammo.
But if you were to buy them in the same quantity, which would be cheaper, hollow points or just regular lead bullets?
Well, we couldn't use regular lead bullets because we're shooting semi-automatic pistols. You have issues with that.
Full metal jacket.
You'd have to go with a full metal jacket. Yeah, ideally, you could probably get a cheaper price with full metal jacket, but the problem that we have, and we're trying to sort this out this year, the problem that we have is we don't have any, other than FLETC and just a small number of ranges out there. Most of our folks have to train at ranges. They bring the ammo to these ranges at police departments or whatever. And so the last thing we want is for our officers to mix duty ammo with training ammo. We don't have the ability to control the individual rounds.
But if you could, it would be, well, it would be cheaper if it were.
It would be, sir. And one thing we're doing this year, we have an initiative that we've got working, an acquisition initiative that's part of the WAC for what we call readily identifiable training ammunition. And if we're successful with that, it could yield some higher savings.
Okay. Now, I realize that the Department of Homeland Security is a relatively new department, but it's an umbrella organization that represents several agencies that have been around for a while. So right now, just to put this in perspective, I think there are about 250 million rounds stockpiled by the Department of Homeland Security. That's almost 1 round per adult in the United States, just to put that in perspective. If we look back historically in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, at these departments that have come under Homeland Security, what would be the equivalent number that was stockpiled in those decades?
I can't answer that, sir.
Does anybody have that answer today? Like historically, are we stockpiling more rounds than we did in the 80s or the 90s?
I can't tell you that, but I would be willing to bet if I were to do a data dig on it that we're probably getting a better deal because we're doing more centralized acquisition.
Okay. I'd like to get that answer in the record, if you could, for me. And then also my final question, what's being done to ensure that this ammo doesn't find its way into the black market or, heaven forbid, to drug cartels as in the recent gun walking scandal? If we find a round of ammunition, even at a gun show, but possibly at the scene of a crime, how can we be sure that it didn't fall off the back of the truck at Department of Homeland Security?
We have internal controls over the ammunition issuance process where at the field office level, we have what we call senior firearms instructors that are responsible and accountable for the inventory.
There are no unique markings on these bullets or the cases so that we know if they get into the black market or, heaven forbid, go over the border?
The boxes have lot numbers.
Just the boxes, not the shells themselves?
That's correct. The shells themselves will not have that.
If we're looking for accountability and we want to avoid any of these instances, wouldn't that be a good thing to do?
It would. It certainly would add some cost for a manufacturer to add a different type of marking to a cartridge if it's something that—
Even just the head stamp?
Yeah,
it would already put on there?
It depends on the— yeah, it depends on the cartridge itself. In order for them to try to maximize the their efficiency, they want to try to use as much of the components that are used in the commercial process.
Thank you. My time is expired.
Thank the gentleman, and we'll look forward to following up with that. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, if I may, with the subcommittee's indulgence, I want to take just a moment of personal privilege. I have 2 special guests with us today from my district. Christina McFarland in the back there, and her daughter and son, Connor and Chloe. Just raise your hands. But these are very special people. They're her husband and their father was killed in Afghanistan, and they're visiting us today. And we're very pleased to welcome you and thank your family for its incredible sacrifice. So, again, just a moment of personal privilege. Thanks so much, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. Thank
you. Now, if I may, let me address some questions to Mr. Medina. One of the programs, actually, that's pretty prominent in Central Florida is simulation. I don't know, have we talked? I had to attend several other hearings at the same time. Have they talked about simulation and use for fire testing today?
We have not discussed it here.
You have not discussed it today. Do you have a program in DHS for?
We actually took this on as a Weapons and Ammunition Commodity Council initiative back, I believe, and I'll have to do the research on it, in 2010, where we have an IDIQ contract for simulators. We have the ability for programs to buy them. And so while it doesn't replace all the live fire, and it can never because the technology is not quite there yet, we definitely are big proponents of it.
See, I would have to differ with you dramatically. The military is saving hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, billions of dollars, with simulation. And most of our troops, how many of your troops are going into, or your personnel are going into combat daily? They're not firing those weapons actually in operational situations daily, are they?
No, they're not.
No, most of what you're firing is in training. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Almost all of it. There is absolutely no reason why you should not have an extensive simulation training. And the ability to train personnel, whether it's military or law enforcement, with simulation, not using live fire, has incredible potential for saving and better training. And you can't come before the committee and tell me that they don't have sophisticated systems or simulation that will equal their experience on the range.
Sir, I'm a big proponent of that. I've been to several.
But how do we have contracts? We
do.
And what agencies do?
ICE established a contract, a DHS-wide contract back in 2010 for simulators. Now, the actual units are quite expensive, but we're a huge proponent.
You don't even have to buy them. You can lease them, and they can provide the training and the service.
Right. The only issue that they're having, you see it in the military with really expensive types of equipment and aircrafts for the simulations, and they get a lot of value for their buck out of that. But when it comes to small arms, it's
come on, don't tell me that. 20 years ago, I helped the live fire testing program that the military, in fact, we started almost all the military simulation with saving money for not firing live ammunition in training. Almost every penny of it. I know that for a fact.
We're doing FLETC is currently using simulations for some of the basic instruction, just to get a little bit more of the basic foundation.
I think you need to get beyond basic. Again, in a time in which we have incredible deficits, and I've seen some of the money that you're spending is absolutely outrageous on live fire testing. It can be done with simulation, and they have the technology to properly train people. Your folks aren't in a day-to-day combat situation like our military, so don't sit there and tell me that you cannot use this to a greater extent and save taxpayer money.
Sir, I certainly am a big proponent of simulation.
But how much money are you spending out of your budget for simulation?
Well, I can't.
Can you provide that to the committee?
I can provide you.
I bet it's pennies on the dollar. And actually, if you turn that around, you can save probably 85–90% of what you're spending on ammunition and live fire training by substituting it with simulation.
One of the problems we have with simulation is it doesn't replicate the recoil. And since we shoot handguns, unlike the military that mostly shoots.
Again, please don't tell me that. We started the program and followed this for 20 years. I think you're so far behind the times, and again, using the most expensive means of training, live ammunition, and you do not have to use that, and you can enhance their skills far greater in a whole host of experiences that you can't replicate at a range firing that weapon. Did you know that?
We do that. We use it for judgment.
Okay, I want to see exactly how much you're spending for every agency. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I know we're looking at other agencies too. I'd like to see what they are spending as far as simulation versus live fire testing, and have that made part of the record. Thank you, and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the time. And Mr. Medina, I'll tell you that the Make It Training Systems group is located just north of FLETC there in my district. We'd welcome you down anytime you're interested in pursuing some of their new products. It's really amazing.
Not far from where I am.
It's thinking about contracting, though, Doctor. That's what I had on my mind. Consumables. Is it typical for all of the consumables that we'll use across a calendar year to be collected in 1-, 2-, 3-year increments in advance? Do we stockpile toner cartridges and batteries and other things in the same way that we stockpile ammunition?
I would say stockpile is not the right terminology. We put contracts in place that give maximum flexibility for, if it were ideal, it would be just-in-time buying. So I'm not saying that there is an inventory of a variety of consumables, but nobody stockpiles. Frankly, nobody has space to stockpile.
Well, I guess stockpile does have a connotation to it. But as I look at the numbers, it looks like we have about an 18-month supply of ammunition on hand at any one time. Is that a fair generalization?
We've mentioned it several times, yes.
Right. But would that also be true of toner cartridges and batteries and other off-the-shelf items that we might procure?
Yeah, the answer is no. You're not going to get a huge inventory of many items. There will be some inventories in certain places.
So take me through again the unique nature of coming from the Deep South, where I do. We won't use the word stockpile either, but when there's a good sale at the sporting goods store, we'll go down and buy enough rounds to get us through the next hunting season. What is the challenge that you all face in your procurement of ammunition that's different than your procurement of the rest of your consumables?
Okay, and I think Mr. Medina has covered that a couple of times in sort of, why we buy and have the 18-month supply. Well, I put the contracts in place that make sure we get a good deal when we buy. But what Mr. Medina could answer.
Well, and that's actually why I wanted to talk to you about it from a procurement perspective, because you're in this business, right? Yes. It may be that as someone who has to go out and prosecute the mission each day, I may have a different set of priorities than folks who are in the professional procurement business. I may think that it takes 2.5 years to get something done. You may tell me I can run down to Walmart and get it done myself. So I wanted to focus on you as a technician. Okay.
So just sharing what we shared earlier, there's time in a procurement process. I didn't create the Federal Acquisition Regulation, created in 1984. Lots of rules there for a lot of good reasons. So it takes time to buy things. That's my world. But then in this particular sector, my best understanding, Mr. Medina understands this a little bit better than I do, a lot better than I do. That community, in terms of making ammunition, it takes time, and there are a lot of issues in terms of the delivery of it. So there's the contracting time that it takes, and then there's the time it takes to actually produce the ammo.
And is that your experience in procurement? Again, these are so many of these are off-the-shelf items that Walmart procures, that we as individuals procure. Is it your experience that things of this commonly used nature are frequently 18-month lead time items?
Not for toner cartridges and things like that, but ammo is different. There's just not a ton of producers of ammo in the country.
And so we buy as much as we can in advance because we're concerned as a nation we won't get as much? Tell me about why the limited supply. I've got to have the same amount every year anyway. The producers are producing the same amount every year anyway. If there's a limited supply, buying more in advance would certainly reduce the supply available to everyone else, but I'm not sure how it would advantage me as a government actor.
Yeah, no, I put the contract in place that gives us the ability to buy over time and get a good deal. In terms of when to buy and how much to buy, I depend on the law enforcement community. I don't know how much ammo they need to do their training and operations. So.
And you'll let a single contract for the entire scope of Federal government? If we need a generic full metal jacket 9mm cartridge, you'll consolidate all of those orders across all agencies and put that out as one?
So that's an excellent question. That goes to the point of strategic sourcing for the government as a whole. And so, for instance, we have, and this has been over a couple, 2, 3 administrations, strategic sourcing is something that's here to stay. It's getting a good deal for the taxpayer. But office supplies, where we all government agencies use office supplies, GSA strategically source some contracts, and we try to use those contracts to drive prices down in that area. If it were determined, for whatever reason, that there was something else that should be strategically sourced where we could leverage the buying power of the entire government, it wouldn't be done out of my shop. I might be an executive agent for the government or a lead in it. And if we had a need for whatever that was, then we would participate in that particular government-wide buy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. And now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Medina, Dr. Nayak, are you aware of any shortages in Homeland Security? Are there any shortages of any ammunition in Homeland Security?
No, I'm not aware of any.
Is there any situation on any agency that you're aware of that does not have the supply that it needs for training?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is there anybody specifically within Customs and Border Patrol that doesn't have ammunition for training?
Not that I'm aware of.
So it's your understanding that they should have a full supply to do all of their training requirements?
They sure should.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. It's titled Ammunition Shortage for Border Patrol. It's from National Border Patrol Council Local 2554, talking about how they have been given notice that due to budget cuts, they will not be issued any ammunition this quarter for maintaining. Without objection, so ordered. Is there anything due to sequestration or budgets or anything else that is inhibiting the ability of law enforcement to go through its firearms training?
Not as far as I know. My understanding is that the current policy that allows for practice ammunition, subject to availability of ammunition, and
we said that there's no shortage of any ammunition.
There's no shortage, but if you don't shoot as much in practice, then you have more in reserves, which means you have less to buy. And I think there's an effort to save a little money. So there's no question about that.
Let me ask you, let me read the question that I asked, and I do appreciate the answer, but I don't understand the answer, and I want some clarification. I asked how to describe how Homeland Security plan to use their ammunition, and under Customs and Border Patrol, this is the answer. Approximately 70% of Customs Border Patrol ammunition is used for quarterly qualifications, mandated firearms training, and advanced firearms training, as well as testing and evaluation. I understand that. Don't have a problem. 20% of Customs and Border Patrol ammunition is allocated for maintaining CBP's operational posture. I'm still not understanding why 20 to 30% of the ammunition is for operational posturing, and what happens to that ammunition?
Operational posture means the ammunition that you need in order to work your day in, day out.
But once you issue that ammunition, it's not as if every agent walks back and their clips are all emptied out. Their magazine is empty.
Right. But that's just it's a number that is assigned to ammunition.
But you testified earlier when we were asking some questions that you don't allow for the mixing and matching of training versus operational ammunition.
Well, it's the same kind of ammunition.
No doubt. If you got a Glock, I have a Glock 23, 40 caliber round. So you're saying that you don't. Earlier you said you don't mix and match.
If I issue, well, we don't. What we do, it's the same ammo. If I issue you 6 magazines, a complement of ammunition for your Glock, and 6 magazines for your M4, and let's say 3 or 4 magazines for your Model 26 that you carry on your ankle, that's your complement of ammo plus some practice ammunition. That's what you might get issued.
But I still don't understand how, if 70% is for training, I buy that.
Right.
I just don't understand how 30%, because it says here, the remaining 10% is dedicated to maintaining ammunition reserves at both the national and local levels. So if you keep adding 10% to the reserves year after year after year, you get to the point where you've got an awful lot of ammunition in reserve.
Well, there is a limitation to what we can keep in reserves, and obviously, I mean, certainly that's a function of the space, and most of this stuff is in field offices that don't have the space, so there's a limit, no question about it.
I still don't understand what the operational ammunition, what happens to it, because the worry is that it's being taken to the black market. It's just being shot in the field, shooting, who knows what. They're taking it home for their own personal use. And it's not as if we're missing 20 or 30 rounds here. We're talking on an annualized basis about tens of millions of rounds just within Customs and Border Patrol. And then I go down to the border and the guys say, we get 0 ammunition for training. They had us a bag, literally a baggie right now with 60 bullets in it so that they can do their quarterly qualifying.
Ammunition that's issued for operational purposes, and that's the complement of ammo that you get for your magazines and the weapons that you have, is then at some later point in time brought to the range and expended in training. That's what happens to it.
I think the way we track this, the way we classify this, seems so different. What I appreciate from the Social Security Administration, again, I'm patting them on the back, they can break it down per agent, per round, I mean, with all due respect, they got their act together. And what I don't understand is they're using 600 rounds per agent per year. You're using almost 1,000 rounds more per agent per year. I don't understand the differences. I recognize that somebody may be carrying 3 weapons, they may be carrying 1 weapon, but when you average it out and you look at the totality of it, it really doesn't make sense. With that, my time has expired. I now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Chairman Jim Jordan.
Mr. Medina, your title says Assistant Director, National Firearms and Tactical Training Unit, U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I've read your background, or glanced at your background. You have extensive service, and we appreciate that, and training in law enforcement. Mr. Nayak mentioned earlier the way this works is you tell him what you need. You're the professional. You tell him what's required.